Hello, and welcome to our brand new video Bible study. This series is titled Joseph, Son of Jacob. Now, there's a practical reason for the title. There are many people in the Bible who are named Joseph, and I want to be clear as to which Joseph this study is about. It's not about Joseph, the father of Jesus, although that would make a pretty good study. It's not about Joseph of Arimathea. It's about Joseph, son of Jacob, whose story is primarily found in Genesis, though it's mentioned elsewhere. In our culture, we have a family name. For most of us, it's our last name is the family connection, but in other cultures, the family name actually comes first. The title of the study uses a common biblical format, very cultural for that day. Joseph, son of Jacob. You are identified by your father. Father's name would kind of be a title, if you will. Now, most studies begin the story of Joseph with chapter 37. That's where you begin to read the story in the book of Genesis. But ours will not. Because to understand Joseph, it helps to understand his family. I think that's also true of you and I. It's been said that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. I certainly see a lot of my mother and a lot of my father in myself, and certainly my brothers and sisters have had an impact on me, cousins. There are people who had an impact on me, so maybe there is some truth to that saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Well, in this particular case, boy, is that true. Even the name he was given tells a story. Now, according to Who's Who in the Bible, which is written by Joan Kamei and Ronald Brownrigg, Joseph's name meant, "May God add children." Why would they name him that? Well, understanding his family clearly explains the reason for his name. The book of Genesis is primarily the story of the family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, obviously, Noah is a very big part of that story. Adam and Eve are a very big part of Genesis. But most of Genesis concentrates on the children of Abraham. Now, Isaac was the son of Abraham, and Jacob was the son of Isaac. A common thread that ran throughout this family was sibling rivalry caused by favoritism. Isaac's father favored Esau. That was Jacob's twin brother. Rebekah, his mom, Isaac's wife, favored Jacob, and it caused a great deal of strife in that family. Not surprisingly, this affected Jacob. Of his 12 sons, he had a favorite. He favored Joseph, which will be a big part of our study tomorrow, by the way. Jacob had many wives, but he had a favorite. His favorite was Rachel, Joseph's mother. He was also married to Leah, Rachel's older sister. Actually, Rachel was the younger sister. Leah was the older sister, and as we will see, they had a damaging sibling rivalry that seriously affected the entire family. So now let's turn to the Bible. Let's turn to learn more about the family of Joseph, which will help us to understand Joseph's situation a little more, I think, once we get into the story. We're going to start with Genesis 29. Genesis 29 with verse 31. Genesis 29, verse 31. Listen to this. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive. But Rachel, her sister, remember, remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." She conceived again. And when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Because the Lord heard that I was not loved, he gave me this one too." So she named him Simeon. Again, she conceived. And when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Now, at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." So he was named Levi. She conceived again. And when she gave birth to a son, she said, "This time I will praise the Lord." So she named him Judah. And then she stopped having children. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister Leah. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." Jacob became angry with her and said, "Am I in the place of God, who has kept you from having children?" So you can see, this is a pretty a difficult family situation, I guess is the best way to say it. And Joseph was born into that. So it obviously affected him. It obviously affected his brothers, as we're going to see in the story tomorrow. I mean, favoritism like this, sibling rivalry like this, hurts a lot of people. So there's a sibling rivalry between Leah and Rachel we can see here. And it was really about the love of Jacob. It was about Jacob's favor. Verse 31 is fascinating. God saw that Leah was not loved and enabled her to conceive while her sister Rachel remained childless. What do you think about that? Now, Linda B. Hinton says that according to the Old Testament belief, God controls the conception of life. Now, having children was evidence of having God's favor and blessing. There was a connection that people made there. Now, Hinton believed God took pity on Leah because she was unloved. I agree more with John MacArthur. John MacArthur says that God took account on Leah's behalf. In other words, Jacob had demoted Leah, if you will. Leah held a lesser place than Rachel did, but God had not done that with Leah. God had enough love to go around. Leah had prayed about her husband's rejection and had been troubled by it, as seen by the names of her 4 sons. Now, did you notice? As we were reading about the sons, it gives the meanings of their names, which really tells us the story of what was going on here. Jacob's firstborn was named Reuben. See, a son is what that literally means. See? The Lord had helped her in this time of need, and the Lord had seen her misery, and she finally had a son. Now, Simeon was next, which means he who hears. So God had heard Leah's pleas. Levi is derived from the Hebrew word for attached. So she was hoping that Jacob would become attached to her, strengthening their bond. And then Jacob had a 4th son by Leah called Judah, which is derived from the Hebrew word for praise. Leah was praising the Lord because she could have Jacob's children. But notice what verse 35 says. Then she stopped having children. I wonder why. You know, there isn't a reason really given in Scripture. Now, some scholars believe the sibling rivalry kept intensifying. Leah was kind of rubbing it in. I don't know about that, but one thing is for certain. Whatever happened, it really affected Rachel, who remained childless through all this. Now, 31, so it's the beginning of chapter 30, starting with verse 1, gives us a very, well, it seems to me anyway, to be a kind of strange reaction or a strange thing that Rachel says to Jacob. She says, "Give me children or I'll die." Well, Jacob was angry at this and said to her, "Am I in the place of God, who has kept you from having children?" The Zondervan Study Bible says that Jacob often tried to secure blessings of his own effort. And early in his life, it was all about him. But here, he acknowledges that blessing could only come from God. Now, that's a good thing. But MacArthur points out something important here. MacArthur points out that it was spoken in a moment of frustration. And I agree. As right as Joseph was about God and as close as he was becoming to God, the writer of Genesis makes it clear that what he said to his wife Rachel was said in anger. Rachel then chooses to give her maid as a surrogate mother. Now, this may seem unusual, but it wasn't in that time. In fact, Jacob's own grandmother did the same exact thing when she couldn't have children. So Rachel chooses to give her maid as a surrogate, and because Leah couldn't have children anymore, she did the same thing. Talk about sibling rivalry. Each maid bore 2 male children for Jacob, bringing the total to 8 sons. Now comes a story in the Bible that you might easily dismiss. I have to admit, I used to. But this is one of those stories that deep study is required. And if you dismissed it, you'd miss that the divide between the sisters widens. So I don't want you to miss the story, and I want to give you an understanding that you probably never really thought about before. This is actually still chapter 30, by the way, but verses 14 through 19. Okay? So it's 30, starting with verse 14. During the wheat harvest, Reuben went out into the fields and found some mandrake plants, which he brought to his mother, Leah. Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" Seems like a strange reaction, doesn't it? "Very well," Rachel said. "He can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." What? Verse 16. So when Jacob came in from the fields that evening, Leah went out to meet him. "You must sleep with me," she said. "I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he slept with her that night. God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a 5th son. Then Leah said, "God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband." So she named him Issachar. Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a 6th son. And then Leah said, "God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor because I have borne him 6 sons. So she named him Zebulun. What do you think about that, huh? I guess there's some times where we read the Bible and it's pretty hard to understand, and I think that's one of those times. So let me take you through it. Leah and Jacob's son Reuben found some mandrake plants and gave them to his mother. Now Rachel asked for some plants, and there was a reason for that. That's why Leah says to her, "Wasn't it enough that you took my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" Like I said, the rivalry just kept growing because Jacob still had favoritism. Jacob still favored Rachel over Leah. But why did she get so upset? Why did she say that? You see, a mandrake plant bore a fruit often called a love apple. It was a narcotic that was said to increase ardor and help overcome barrenness. That's why Rachel and Leah both wanted it, and why Leah really didn't want Rachel to have them. And just when you think it couldn't get more bizarre, it does. Rachel allows Leah to sleep with Jacob that night in exchange for mandrake plants. What happened? God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant. Is the credit given to the plants? Nope. No. Credit's given to God. For God is in control of this uncontrollable situation. It seems that way, doesn't it? Leah named their son Issachar, which sounds like the Hebrew word for reward. In fact, she became pregnant with another son and gave birth to Zebulun, which meant honor. But what about Rachel? What happened to her? Now remember, Very important. Rachel is Joseph's mother, so it's very important to the story. So now we're going to read chapter 30 again, this time finishing up in verses 22 to 24. Make that 23, 24. Okay? Oh no, 22. Then God remembered Rachel. Isn't that a beautiful thing to hear? And she gave birth to a son and enabled her to conceive. And she became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. She named him Joseph and said, may the Lord add to me another son. So finally, what Rachel had been hoping for happened. She finally had a son, and now I hope you understand the meaning of his name. The mandrake plants failed, but prayer did not. God remembered Rachel, allowed her to conceive, and she had Jacob's 11th son. But unfortunately, the story of Rachel has a very sad ending. The wife Jacob loved the most, the one who sought more children, died in childbirth, having the final son of Jacob, Benjamin. Now Rachel, before she died, named him Ben-Oni, son of trouble. Jacob, and the only time he did this, by the way, changed his name to Benjamin, son of my right hand, the right hand, a position of importance. Favoritism led to sibling rivalry. Sibling rivalry led to trouble. That was the history of Joseph's family, and it greatly affected the lives of Joseph and his brothers, as we'll see next time. Chapter 37. So until then, may God richly bless you. Have a wonderful day.